Hello, I'm Hannah and welcome to my February wrap-up. February's been an okay reading month. I had a really good January reading month. February, I have read 11 books this month, which is exactly what I read last month. But it sort of doesn't feel as successful because I think like 4 of those books were for work, which, if you are new here, means educational non-fiction. And the rest, a couple of books really jump out as ones that I really enjoyed. And a few just sort of like solid ones. But hey, let's kick off. I will put up here the moods that I read in February according to Storygraph in case you are interested. And is there anything else I need to say generally about the month of February before we kick off? I don't think so, except eagle-eyed among you will notice that I'm sat in front of a different bookcase on the floor this month. We are in the slow and evidently very loud process of getting our windows replaced, which I cannot wait because you could literally feel the wind coming through them before. But it means that downstairs is currently not possible. So we're currently in my bedroom with some additional furniture, including this stepladder, which does not normally live here. And this bookcase that I guess you won't normally see and is a little bit messy. This is the home of short story collections and poetry and plays and miscellaneous, including like sort of publication-y things like this Cunning Folk magazine and what's this one that I bought? The Other Side of Hope, Journeys in Refugee and Immigrant Literature, which I still haven't read. So this is a stupid place for them to live. Anyway, it's a different problem for a different time. So let's kick off. We actually started February with a book that I really enjoyed, which was Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro, which is translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle. I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail here because I read this for the Storygraph Read the World challenge. This was for the Argentina prompt, and I did a whole vlog reading this book. So if you are interested in my in-depth thoughts, you can head there. But a quick summary is essentially this follows one woman called Elena or Elena. I still haven't decided how I'm supposed to be pronouncing that name. And her daughter has recently died by what everyone else believes to be suicide. And Elena believes that she was killed. And it is all told in one day. So it's quite, although it's only a little thing, it's quite intense, made more so by the fact that Eleanor is suffering from MS. Is it MS? Is it? Oh, I'm doubting myself now. Oh God, this is what happens when Hannah Lost the Plot talks about a book that she read right at the start of the month. Parkinson's. It's not MS, it's Parkinson's. But yes, she's suffering from that, and I think as a book that really confronts you with the reality of what having a condition like that means and how much of your brain power and just general conscious awareness is used up by the experience of having a body that is working against you. I thought it was brilliant. Elena and her daughter have a really difficult relationship. They don't always like each other. They are both incredibly judgmental of each other. You do not always like Elena in this book, but I think it's such a good book and I really recommend this. If you are also doing the Read the World challenge and you haven't got a book lined up for Argentina, may I recommend. So that is Elena Knows. The second book I read, well, I'm going to do all the books that I read as me first, and then I will very quickly tell you about the books that I read for work in case it's of interest, but I'll do that at the end. I'm back. Sorry if I have moved. Technical issues. One of these days I'll manage to get through a video without technical issues, but that day is not today. The second book I listened to was The Book of Goose by Yiyun Li, which is a book that I did really enjoy, although not entirely. So this is a historical fiction book, literary historical fiction. It is set predominantly in rural France, post-war, and it's a coming-of-age story, really. It follows, well, it is told from the perspective of Ines. It's spelled Agnes. I never learnt French, I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of so much stuff in this bit. Yeah, so it follows them when they're young girls, but it's being told from the perspective of her when she's much older, and we know she now lives in America, and that she's married to a man, and that she has been unable to have children. But the vast majority of the book is told in the past, is her recollecting the story of her childhood, really, and in particular the relationship she had with her best friend Fabienne. So Fabienne is a kind of wild child. They're in their early teens, maybe preteen, at the start of the book. And Fabienne is this like wild girl who, you know, can't be tamed, and Ines is sort of her devoted friend. And I think we've seen that kind of pairing in friendships a lot in literature and films, etc. I really liked the iteration of it in this book, particularly as they grow up. And essentially what the book is about is the two of them. Well, Fabienne decides she's going to write a book, but she can't really write. She doesn't really go to school. So Ines writes it, and they get this postmaster in her village to help them get it published. And essentially what ends up happening, because Fabienne refuses to put her name on the book, is that Ines becomes this kind of prodigal child author. And from that point, her life diverts quite significantly from Fabienne's. She ends up going to a finishing school in the UK. And man, are the Brits not represented well in this book, but I mean, not without warrant, I guess. But yeah, the woman who plays the schoolmistress is... there is a lot of classism in this book. There is a lot of a sort of middle-class inability to believe that people who are working class might possibly prefer their way of living, and maybe don't even aspire to become middle class. And that's really well explored. The book is also very much about identity and stories, and who gets to tell whose story, and what stops us feeling able to tell our own stories. And I did, like I said, I really liked it on the whole. I didn't so much enjoy the framing of the narrative with this kind of retrospective look back, because it really did kind of bookend the book. It wasn't a sort of, you know, sometimes where you have a kind of retrospective narrative where you're kind of in the present and then you go back in time, and that rocks kind of throughout the narrative. This didn't really do that. It kind of was at the start and at the end, at least from what I can remember of it. It was at the start and at the end. And that felt a little jarring to me and a little too neat. But on the whole, I really liked it, and it was the first book I've read by Yiyun Li, and I know there's quite a big backlist there, so I'll definitely be looking to get a few more of their titles in the future, because I enjoyed it on the whole. The next book was another audiobook, actually. I listened to A Burst of Light and Other Essays by Audre Lorde. This is the first Audre Lorde that I have... Audre? what happened there? Audre Lorde that I've read, and I liked it, but a bit like with the James Baldwin essay collection that I read last month, if you've seen my January wrap up. Obviously with an essay collection, you're going to have essays that you gravitate towards naturally, and again, like the James Baldwin collection, these were essays that were written quite a while ago. On the whole, I think it was... I've realised, if you don't know who Audre Lorde is, you probably do, but if you don't, she was a poet and an essayist. She was a black, queer, feminist poet, and was really one of the first voices, big voices in feminism, to really try and get intersectionality to be a thing in the feminist movement. But this is, like I said, the first of hers that I've read. I think she's primarily known as a poet, but the essays that I really liked, I can't remember the titles of them because I listened on audio. I sometimes just like, and on the Scribd app, it doesn't tell you what the title of each chapter is. It just says like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So I never knew what the titles of the essays I was listening to were. But I think it was A Burst of Light, like the title essay, was about her experience of cancer. So heavy, but I thought just very... She's such an honest writer. And she wrote so frankly about how pissed off she was that she had cancer and how having it had changed her relationship with her body and with her life. And I think possibly because that is such a... Did you hear Lewin just really heavily sigh there? He's had a very stressful day. He doesn't like it when there are workmen in the house. Yeah, I think because that, unfortunately, that experience is so much still a thing today in our society. It was, yeah, really, really affecting. Sorry, my brain just went on a wild tangent that was nothing to do with that book. So, yes, I enjoyed A Burst of Light and other essays. I really would like to get to Audre Lorde's poetry, though. I think I will like that more. I don't know why I've been reading so many essay collections. Generally, I don't love essay collections, but they're the sort of thing that I always feel like I should read. And I never really love them. With the exception of Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig, which I genuinely did really like, but that was more like a memoir and essays. Anyway, there she is, tangenting again. The next book I read was my favourite book of the month, and it's going to surprise nobody if you have spent so much as a second on my channel. Previously, it was Winter by Ali Smith. Ha! I love Ali Smith. I really love that I came to her quite late and therefore have a lovely big backlist of books to still be getting to. But this is the second in her seasonal quartet that she wrote, really responding quite immediately to what was going on in society at the time. And again, this is another book that I have read in a longer reading vlog, so I'm gonna try not to talk about it for too long, but it's Ali Smith, so I might. How can I put it succinctly? What I think Ali Smith is amazing at, and I think I say this in the vlog, is really exploring politics and exploring society through character, and through individuals. I think she writes so sensitively, but also unflatteringly about people, and she kind of can do both. So she writes these people where on one page you're like really feeling for this person because they're going through something, and then on the next page you're like, oh, you're a fucking idiot. And I love that, because that's people, right? That's human beings. That's what we're like. We're equal parts delightful and insufferable. And that, I think, really comes across in Ali Smith's writing. I thought it was ace. Go watch the video if you want more specific details, because I can't do short, snappy summaries of Ali Smith books. I have tried many times on this channel now and have failed every time. So there we go. Next up is a book that I read partly on my e-reader and partly on audio, and it was the February pick for my book club. A shout out, my monthly shout out to Queer Books Newcastle. If you are queer and in Newcastle and fancy joining a book club, I will link the group down below on Instagram. So this book was for LGBTQ plus History Month. We decided that we wanted to read a memoir. Non-fiction's a bit, it's not a great, like standard non-fiction's not great fodder for book clubs, I don't think. So we ended on a memoir, and the memoir we chose was Life as a Unicorn by Amrou Al-Khadi. Amrou I had never heard of before, but some people may have heard of him as the drag queen Glamrou. So Amrou is a queer, non-binary, Iraqi Muslim drag queen, and what I really did enjoy about this memoir was exploring those intersectionalities and some of the tensions that have existed in his life as a result of it, particularly between his queer identity and his Muslim identity. And there was lots to kind of think about and food for thought. I think I really liked parts of this memoir, and I always feel weird like reviewing a memoir because it sort of feels like judging a person's life. I don't know how comfortable I am with that. But yeah, I definitely didn't love this, and there were moments where I actually found the narrative voice and Amrou's perspective sometimes really quite frustrating. But on the whole, I think if you're interested in, like I said, those kind of intersections and identities, I really, really liked that there was a spiritual element through the book, and that the resolution of that tension in his identity, or their identity, sorry, their identity was, the resolution of that wasn't that they stopped being a Muslim. And so they go through this journey of kind of rediscovering their faith and their spirituality and what it means to them to be a Muslim and a queer Muslim. And that was really interesting. But overall, the book was quite fractured and felt quite, it had really long chapters for a start, which is why I started listening to it on audiobook, because I think the whole book was about like 300 pages and there were only about 6 chapters in it, and those chapters are too long for me, especially on an e-reader, because I don't love reading on an e-reader. I only read titles on there that I'm either like less sure that I'm going to like, or I can't currently get my hands on a copy of for whatever reason. So I started listening to it on audio partly for that reason, and there were some very weird segues in the book as well, like bits where there was a lot about marine life and aquariums, and then a whole section about quantum physics, and that just felt a little unusual. But yeah, I think overall I'm glad I read it. I don't think it is my favourite memoir or even my favourite like queer memoir that I have read. But there we are. Next up was a book that I borrowed from my friend Bex, and it is Embroideries by Marjane Satrapi. I have previously read by the same author her graphic memoir Persepolis, and then Persepolis Part 2. Was it just called Persepolis 2? But yes, so Marjane Satrapi is a graphic novelist and illustrator, and I really liked Persepolis, which sort of follows, kind of tracks her childhood and adolescence in Iran amidst the incredibly turbulent political goings on in Iran in the 90s, 80s, 90s. And this is sort of in the same vein but different. So this, rather than kind of, although it is still autobiographical, it actually just follows one afternoon of drinking tea with her family in a kind of group of women. So social activities, the traditional kind of social setup in Iran, according to this book, can be quite gendered. So there'll often be a kind of social gathering where everyone's together, and then the men will kind of go off and do something manly, and then all the women will go and into the kitchen and they will drink this incredibly strong Middle Eastern tea, and essentially have a good chinwag and a gossip. And that's what this book is. It is one session of that with this group of Iranian women, and I really liked it. It had moments that were very funny. It's quite gossipy, it's a little bit bitchy, but it is also has a lot about female friendships and female kind of support, and a lot of it is talking about relationships, particularly relationships with men and power dynamics and attitudes towards sex and sexuality. And yeah, I just thought, I mean, I read the whole book in one sitting, and it's because it's a graphic novel, and here it'll just kind of show you some pages so you can get a feel for. So some pages quite texty, but others not so much. And I think I read it cover to cover in about 40 minutes. But yeah, I thought it was great. If you have read and enjoyed Persepolis, then I recommend this. I am not very well versed in graphic novels. I haven't read that many of them. So if you have any recommendations for ones that are kind of in this vein, in terms of content, I don't mind if the art style is different because I don't really know much about graphic novel art styles. But these kind of like, I'm liking this sort of memoir, graphic memoir style. So we had that. And then the final book that I read this month, before I get on to briefly tell you about my work reading, is one that I read on my e-reader called This Is Happiness by Niall Williams. And this is a funny one. So if you imagine kind of the layers of a book where like the concept is here and the words on the page are here, I loved the concept of this book. So it's another historical book. It is set in this tiny little rural community right on the western coast of Ireland. And it follows the run-up to when this village is going to get electricity for the first time. And I think choosing that moment to explore a kind of community was such a good idea, and it was so interesting to kind of see the various attitudes towards that. Some people really welcoming the progression, other people being scared about what that means for their way of life and how they get on as this little kind of community. And I loved that concept. And then I loved the word level, like the sentence level of this book. I highlighted so many things on my e-reader, which I don't even know how to access the things I highlighted on my e-reader, but I highlighted them nonetheless. Like beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing. Very funny at points too. My nana was Irish, and although not from this part of Ireland, there were definitely moments that like really felt like her, really like captures that like Irish spirit of being quite like self-effacing and quite sort of grim but funny. You know what I mean. But yeah, I really, really liked that. And some of the most beautiful descriptions of rain that I have ever read. I think Niall Williams is a beautiful writer. Where I'm not so sure that this book was successful for me was the middle bit, like the narrative. So we're following No, which is short for Noel, and a bit like the Book of Goose, we know he is telling this retrospectively as an old man now, but it's recounting a time when he was much younger, and he'd been sent to go and stay with his grandparents in this tiny little village. His grandparents are Dodi and Granga. And he's been sent there because he has just dropped out of the seminary. So he's basically had this crisis of confidence. He was going to become a priest, and now he is not going to become a priest. And so he's kind of packed off and sent to be his grandparents' problem for a period of time. And that's the kind of setup. And we follow some of the characters. We find out about them. He does some stupid stuff. There is this wonderful man called Christy who comes with the electrical company and is boarding with the family, and he's got a really interesting backstory, and everyone was interesting, but the character the character drive throughout felt a little lacking for me. I always enjoyed the book when I picked it up because I enjoyed the writing so much, but I wasn't picking it up to find out what happened next, is probably the best way to describe it. But it was a lovely, cozy, heartwarming read, and I did feel very big feelings at points in this book, particularly at the end. So on the whole, I really liked the reading experience of it. I wonder if I might have enjoyed it more if I wasn't reading it on an e-reader, because, as I have said, I do not love reading on an e-reader. I only kind of do it if there's something I want to read and I can't get my hands on a copy. So yes, those were my reads for me. So I don't know why I was thinking I hadn't had such a good reading month, because there were some books that I really enjoyed in there. I think, as I have complained about now in several videos, I have had this massive stack of reading that I've needed to do for work, and it has a bit sapped my enjoyment and love of reading. I'm actually so glad that I had this channel prior to having to start doing some of that reading, because having this space to talk about books, I think, has meant that I have read more than I might have done had I not had this channel, because I was really grumpy about reading quite a lot this month. So although I've ended up reading things that I really liked, it has not necessarily been an enjoyable experience of reading. And that's not because the books that I read for work, which are these ones, which I will briefly talk about now, weren't good books. I just, I like reading what I want to read, not what I have to read, you know what I mean? So the first book, I will be quick on these, but I completely understand if you stop watching now. And if you are stopping watching now, please like and subscribe to my channel. It's been lovely to have you. Please tell me what your favourite book that you read in February was, and graphic novel recommendations, please. So, education books. The first one I read was The Boy Question by Mark Roberts. I do have a copy of it, but as I went to grab it off the top of my bookcase to show you it in this video, I have knocked it down the back of the bookcase, which is really unfortunate because I need that book for work. That is a problem for tomorrow me. But yes, this was a book about boys' achievement in schools. If you don't work in education and you aren't aware, there is a massive gender achievement gap in, I was going to say in the UK, I think it's global. It's pretty, I think we have a pretty sizable gap compared to other countries, but the gender gap definitely exists, not just in our country. And Mark is a teacher, and he's currently teaching in Northern Ireland, and he has made a career really out of trying to find strategies that work, but also debunking a lot of things that people believe about boys that just aren't true. Like this idea that if you want boys to try at school, you have to make it a competition. Like competition categorically doesn't motivate boys. It has been proven in research, but yet people still believe it. And yeah, it's a good, handy book with lots of practical stuff. Mark's very into research, so everything that he's done is very well-founded in sort of good educational research. It's really the only audience for it would be practicing teachers or people who are teaching adjacent like me. The next book I read was Leading with Presence by Maggie Farrar. This is a bit of a different one. So Maggie was a head teacher. She's also held several sort of national education leadership positions, and she is an expert in mindfulness. So this book really is about when she's talking about leading with presence, she's talking about being present in the moment and giving of yourself in the moment, and not kind of getting caught up in the day-to-day and the worrying about the future and the worrying about the past of it. Obviously being a head teacher is a stressful job. And yeah, I respect what this book is about, what it is doing. I did find it a little bit repetitive. It's quite practical, so it is essentially a mindfulness guide for head teachers, or any kind of school leader really. But I don't think it was really designed to be read cover to cover in the way that I had to read it for work. I think it's more of a handbook that you would kind of dip in and out of depending on how you're feeling. I actually think, although the audience is definitely school leaders in the examples that she's giving, I feel like it's all transferable to other professional settings as well. But Maggie is also, I've met her a couple of times, and she is just like the most calming, wonderful woman and an absolute delight. I feel like I'm talking so much faster about these books. Sorry if I am. The next one is Lessons from Lockdown by Toni Breslin. This is a book that I appreciate and respect more than I enjoyed reading it. And that's basically because Toni very astutely realised at the very start of the pandemic that this could potentially have really big knock-on effects for schools, and something seismic was going to be happening in our education landscape. And he also found, as he says in many interviews, that because he's a consultant working in the educational landscape, when the schools started shutting down, all his work dried up immediately. So he found himself with a lot of time on his hands. And what he decided to do with that time was speak to school leaders, speak to governors, speak to parents, speak to students, and find out how, and capture and record what was going on the ground during that first wave of COVID through schools. So this is the first book of a trilogy that he's written. So this goes up to the end of the first lockdown, into the summer holidays, and it's quite sweet because at the end of it, there's sort of, oh well, maybe that's it now, and you're like, oh, you've got no idea what's coming for you. But what this book is really is a historical record, and I think it will be studied in schools in 10, 15 years time. Like, it will be source material for how people responded to it. I went to the book launch of not this one, but the second instalment, which came out in January. And there was a panel of head teachers talking about it there. And they all sort of said that they'd forgotten what it had been like. And it's not until I read this book that I remembered. And that COVID amnesia is a real thing now, right? Like, where we've all kind of like repressed the memory of what it was actually like and what we all kind of went through. And that's like your kind of lay people, never mind people who were having to shield and are still shielding as a result of the pandemic. But I think it's a really, really important record. It is a bit dry. So if you're not in the educational sector and you're thinking, oh, that sounds interesting, parts of it really are. parts of it, stuff around governance and things like that, you know, I'm not recommending you read the whole thing cover to cover, because if you don't work in the system, and even if you do work in the system, some of that is not going to be super interesting, but I respect and appreciate its existence. And the final one is Those Who Can Teach by Andria Zafirakou. This one I did not like so much. So Andria, for context, Andria is an art teacher, or was an art teacher, at a school in London. And I think about 5 or 6 years ago, she won the Global Teacher Award, which is a $1 million prize for one outstanding teacher. Wins it every year. Don't ask me what the criteria are and how you pick one teacher out of every single teacher on the face of the planet. But there you go. Andria won it. And since then has set up a charity called Artists in Residence that essentially pays for professional artists, musicians, sculptors, actors, writers to workshop in schools where there are a high proportion of students from lower income households. And that as a premise is great, and I thought this book was going to be more about that. Unfortunately, it's more of a memoir. I say unfortunately, just unfortunately for me, because I wanted more about that, because I'm very passionate about arts education. But it was more of a memoir and more of a, I don't know, I think I found out at the back that most of this, or large parts of this, were ghostwritten. And I sort of a bit think you can tell. And I was disappointed that while Andria comes off very well in this book and is a very good teacher, I mean, she's won that prize, so she's obviously a very good teacher. Teachers on the whole don't come off brilliantly in this book. And I was a bit disappointed by that. And that's probably all I'm going to say. So there we have it. 11 books in February. Some good, some not so good, some middling. But yeah, if you are still here, thanks again. I won't do the whole like and subscribe thing, but you know, please do. Yeah, do let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts are, if you have any recommendations for me, all that good stuff. See you later. Bye.